Nigeria's Ministry of Power has disclosed that 6 trillion naira in revenue is what the country needs to ensure stable power supply. Adedayo, speaking at the Nigerian Oil and Gas Energy Week in Abuja, says huge investments are needed as the country currently generates 1 trillion naira in revenue annually. Well, according to him, the industry needs to attract the 16 trillion naira spent annually by individuals and entities to generate power for themselves.
The informal spendings on generators, on diesel, on petrol was close to 20 trillion. Even if it's just a quarter of that is put in the official power sector, we are talking about incremental revenue of 5 trillion that will bring the sector revenue to 6 trillion. Sincerely, we are going to have something close to uninterrupted 24/7 electricity supply in Nigeria. That is what we are working on to ensure that that trust is back, that confidence is back, and all the manufacturing companies that are doing self-generation can cut it off and reconnect to the national grid.
Well, we're joined now by Adedayo Olowoniyi, who's the Chief Technical Advisor to the Minister of Power. And at our overflow studio is the President of the Nigeria Consumer Protection Network, Kunle Olubiyo. Gentlemen, good to see you both, and thanks for your time. The power issue is one that many have tried to understand, but again, as it were, let's start by talking about the issues raised. First, it looks like an indictment on the government, over the years till this moment, by giving us that estimate, the pain, what Nigerians are going through. Okay. If you say we're spending that amount, we're doing that because you haven't actually provided power. Agreed. So coming into office, what exactly is your finding to ensuring that perhaps that number is reduced?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I think one of the first things that we did when we came into the Ministry of Power was just a little bit of an analysis of the market. You know, where are we, where do we want to go, and really how do we get there? So one of the things that we've seen that has caused the biggest challenge in the market has been the liquidity issue. As the minister always says, that if there is no commercial flow in an industry, then at some point in time, it's going to come crashing down. And I think that's one of the critical issues that we've seen, that government cannot make the investment in the power sector alone. We need private sector. To attract private sector, they need to ensure that there's a line of sight on their returns, and there must be enough liquidity in the segment to pay for the private sector participation in the segment. So that's one of the key focuses of this administration, to ensure that we create a commercially viable sector that is going to attract private investment to match government investment to ensure long-term sustainability of the sector.
Well, it does seem, from all indication, experts will tell you what one major problem in the power sector is lack of investment, correct, even on the part of the government itself. Now, I mean, we hear that over $1 billion is investment being placed on, alternative or renewable energy, if you like. But what's the government really doing, especially, of course, the power minister himself, doing to attract, private funding? So
for example, when we say $1 billion has been invested in off-grid, it's still government, right? So we work with multilateral agencies like the World Bank, Africa Development Bank. We're funding currently a DARES project, which is a $750 million facility to drive 2.3 million connections to Nigerians through renewable energy, mini-grid, solar home systems. The government is currently investing over $2 billion with the Siemens project, Presidential Power Initiative, to strengthen the grid, to ensure that we can transfer bulk power from generation companies to load centers where distribution companies can then distribute to consumers. And within the same Presidential Power Initiative, we're also looking at investing in the distribution segment to ensure that infrastructure on the distribution segment is also strengthened, and to ensure that sustainable quality power is actually being delivered to consumers. So there is actually quite a lot of investment by government so far. And what we're trying to do to actually attract private sector investment, one of the first things you must do is also create a stable policy environment. So we're currently looking at what we call the NIPSIP, which is the National Integrated Electricity Policy, which is going to define government's position on the electricity value chain, and a strategic implementation plan of the policy. I think once investors see a stable policy environment, and they also see that there's a line of sight on their returns. And one of the things that you see the Honorable Minister talk about is Band A tariffs, cost-effective tariffs, service tariffs, yeah, I know, but I just wanted to relate that to investors. And service reflective tariffs.
And I'll come back to you because when we talk about investors, because it's really dicey. One wonders what kind of investors you're talking about, because we already have the discos, we have the gencos, and these are already they're already in the hands of investors. And to what extent the government is actively ensuring that these investors deliver is another thing. Let's bring in Kunle Olubiyo. Kunle, finally you're joining us. Welcome. And you know, the talk about power will not go away if we keep going in circles. New terms and terminologies haven't actually come into play. We're still talking about investors, talking about those who understand the system, and we're still talking about monies being pumped into it. As someone who represents the consumer, what are your findings?
Well, thank you very much. It's like you said, moving around in circles. To us as end user customers, our area of interest is the areas of quick win, low hanging fruit that to some extent can create quick impact, a tangible impact in the mind of the public. There are a lot of projects that is being marked by the present administration. But as you are aware, the power sector is so delicate in nature that if you need a 5 MVA transformer, you can't go to the shelf and buy like you pick up some other sectors specific equipment. You have to go to original equipment manufacturers, give them specification from the design, and it will take a long period of time to design such this thing. So 2-3 days ago, the power sector, I think on Monday, the power sector was a focus of the special advisor on policy reform and coordination, Adedayo Bala Usman. And one of the takeaway from that discussion is that the quick win, like we have said, to us as end user customers, meter is key. Because somewhere in Gwarimpa about last week, a customer that was paying 25,000 naira in February was slammed a bill of, Gwarimpa is in Abuja, was slammed a bill of 840,000 naira. That's system glitches. System glitches that seems to favor the service provider. So when you have metering from the value chain of cascading of electricity, generation, transmission to distribution, and that's the primary end user with the customer, meter is key to addressing liquidity challenges. Another area of interest to us that government can face, where we can have quick impact, is mini-grid regulation. We had some conversation too on that government need to de-emphasize the evacuation. Evacuation is transmission now, and utilization of grid source energy to the grid. We can have in clusters sector-specific embedded generation, because if you look at the losses on the grid, 48% aggregate of technical, commercial, and collection losses, AT&C losses, is huge. And if not for the escrowing of the account of the discos, the leakages in the sector, sometimes one of the discos realized 10 billion, at Abuja to be specific. I'm aware that they realize about 10 billion naira a month, but what goes to the electricity market is usually not even up to 1 billion. So there are a lot of human elements that we feel that this, because I was a member of the technical panel on power system collapses, and I know that the grid is weak and obsolete. So it's not about throwing money at the grid, But the real issues here now is that we need to de-emphasize the grid. We've talked about reform, unbundling of Transmission Company of Nigeria to TSP, ISO. We are happy that the President Minister have kickstarted the process. But we need to emphasize on metering, effective metering, to make sure that as much as possible, we de-escalate the increasing preponderance of leakages, human element, and losses. Metering is key. And we are happy that the present administration is closing out about 800 billion facility for presidential metering initiative and other things. And we want to see that come into play. And having said that, like I've said earlier, and we will say repeatedly, off-grid generation is the way to go. You can have like the rural electrification. There are a lot of funds out there that could be upscale. Rural electrification averagely is doing about 1 megawatts. They should be allowed to have like 2 to 5 megawatts so that each of the cluster, maybe per state or senatorial districts, they could have sector-specific embedded generation off-grid. This is the way to go. And if this present administration can focus on that, we will get a quick win and the low-hanging fruit. That's my take on that.
Adedayo, Olowoniyi, I mean, I'm sure you have answers to some of the points that he's raised. He talks about off-grid generation. He says it's the way to go. Is that being considered at all by the, by your ministry, of course, by the power minister himself? And this effective metering, I mean, a lot has been said about it over and over again. What exactly is happening in that, regard to ensure that Nigerians are adequately metered? Because if there's any plan at all to redirect the 16 trillion naira that the power minister says Nigerians, have been spending or actually spend in a year, metering should be one of the ways, major ways of redirecting these funds.
No, absolutely, and I'll just start with your last point on metering. So we have what we call the Presidential Metering Initiative that has the goal of procuring 2 million meters every year for the next 5 years. So the idea is to procure about 10 million meters over the next 5 years to ensure that we actually close the meter gap. It's absolutely critical for us to bring in more meters into the market to ensure that we improve the liquidity of the sector. And that is why when this administration came in, one of the first key things that was focused on is what we call the PMI. And the Honorable Minister of Power is the chairman of the PMI. And then I would move on to... The PMI
is...
Presidential Metering Initiative.
Right.
So, and then I'll move on to the first question and what the other interviewer spoke about, which is off-grid. Now, Nigeria is one of the most buoyant off-grid markets. The government has actually catalyzed significant investment in the off-grid, mini-grid market. Like I said, we just completed the 550 million National Electrification Project, which was implemented by the REA to drive mini-grid electrification. And there's now a follow-up program, which is called the DARES program, also funded by World Bank, which the idea is to electrify at least 2.5 million Nigerians. And the idea is, mini-grid is the quickest and fastest way to electricity access. But one thing that we will always remind the public and everyone is that grid supply is still potentially the most efficient. And while we are ensuring access to Nigerians, we must also continue to invest in grid supply because it's the most efficient and cheapest form of electricity supply.
And you see, before I come to Olubiyo, let's bring this back to you because listening to you talking about the presidential metering program, what in heaven's name happened to MAP? There was, a system whereby they wanted to meter people, and the discos didn't do quite well on that. And the other part has to do with SCADA. Listening to Olubiyo, if the discos by now all have their SCADA, where they can remotely monitor and effectively distribute power and fix what is fixable, I don't think we'll be here talking about that arbitrary, billing for that customer in Gwarimpa.
From 25,000 to
To
800,000.
40, yeah.
No,
That's a lot.
I'll come to you, Olubiyo. I
That
actually
question is
wanted
for-
Adedayo
yes.
to speak to us on that so that we understand what the government is doing to ensuring that this is taken care of.
So definitely investment in SCADA is absolutely critical for online monitoring and actually management of the electricity system. One of the things that we're doing on the transmission value chain is that we have a World Bank program that is driving SCADA implementation and should be completed within the next 18 months. This will definitely allow TCN, the transmission company of Nigeria, to be able to manage the transmission system a lot better and to be able to see what's happening with generation companies and to be able to manage what we typically call grid collapse in Nigeria when the grid trips. And SCADA is absolutely necessary to be able to manage that. In terms of the distribution segment, when it comes to SCADA, I only know of one of the distribution companies that actually has SCADA implemented, and we actually went there. EcoDisco has SCADA where they can look at the feeders, they can see when feeders are off, they can then allocate the right resources. So this is also part of what we have to challenge the distribution companies on through NEC, that we need to continue this type of investment in the distribution segment. But we also need to understand that for this investment to be driven, the distribution companies also need to be able to recover cost. And when you look at the tariffs at 68 Naira previously, it wasn't a cost-reflective tariff. Not here to defend the discos, but really to look at a business principle, that where you are not actually able to recover your current investment or existing investment, it then becomes very, very difficult to raise additional capital, either equity or debt, to be able to drive this investment, taking into consideration that the market is actually not generating enough revenues. So we have to actually keep a balance, and it's always the chicken or the egg thing. What comes first? Every investor wants a line of sight on their return.
I think we'll come back to you, Adedayo. Let's go to Olubiyo, because what you just explained also is a clear, departure from what the government should be talking about. We've seen some discos, as you rightly said, that have shown some form of investment into the power sector. I was one of those who witnessed the launch of SCADA in ECO. But again, you haven't actually spoken to us of the kind of investment the federal government has done on TCN. That's why we keep talking about grid collapse. Olubiyo, let's come to you now.
Well,
yes.
I was a member of the Technical Investigative Panel on Power System Collapse in 2013, and I was a member of the Presidential Committee on Review of Electricity Tariff in 2020, Presidential Committee, headed by Fola Adiola of GTB. Why I painted the background is to give you the insight from where I'm coming from. One, the equity structure of the DISCO and the TCN, as it were, the way the TCN is, was specifically designed to create a cash cow. If any business model, the public sector business model is all about spending, padding, budget padding, loading somewhere for interest, apology to the legislature, but loading different budget constituency and what have you. And that, to us, is what the TCN at the moment represents. That is why the unbundling of TCN is inevitable. You had a market pre-privatization that said, look, the bulk electricity trading company, which like a midterm program, was designed to create the necessary security buffer. Every distribution company is supposed to create like a security to the tune of the commodity that they are buying. But the letter of credit or bankable instrument that the DISCO is supposed to pledge are being called off. So as you speak now, the risk exposure of the electricity sector at the downstream is 100%. Now, at the generation level, it is said to be wholly privatized, except National Power Holding Company. Now, the idea of the National Power Holding Company is to bring together all the tiers of government to invest in the electricity sector, because government as well, is the largest spender. Now, what is happening now is that during the COVID, all the generation company in the sector shut down because they were business-minded people. So it was power sector, I mean, NDPAC, that came to the rescue. Now, what the previous administration and the present administration is trying to do to sell the common patrimony of Nigeria in NDPAC.
Right.
One would have expected that when that is sold, the money will be put back into a revolving fund to invest in renewable. But they're not going to do that. They are going to share the money as part of budget funding. It's like selling a family house to go and party. So coming down to transmission is like a cash cow. And the unbundling to operational, technical, and commercial, represented by the ISP and TSP, ISO and TSP, is inevitable.
Right. Very quickly, we'll have to really end it there, unfortunately. But I wonder if Olubiyo can actually respond to that point of TCN being a cash cow. Is it?
Of course.
In 30 seconds. No. Adedayo.
Well, TCN, I would not say, I cannot comment on what Mr. Olubiyo has commented on.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Adedayo Olowoniyi, Chief Technical Advisor to Minister of Power, thank you very much for joining us. And Kunle Olubiyo, President, Nigeria Consumer Protection Network. Thank you.